Assumption number 3, matter is everything. I really like this one. It's really probably one of the most important. So back in the days, we used to think that the earth was flat and that some old sadistic psychopath with a beard ruled the universe. Today, most people make fun of that, of course, but we shouldn't, because we're just the same, except that we believe in a different idol. Today, here, dollar bill, and it is just as ridiculous. Sociology has demonstrated that human beings systematically believe in the idol that is the representation of their own society. It's a form of self-worship, right? And of course, the rules of any society are shaped by its elite in a way that ensures the reinforcement of their own power. So in the old system, that was dominated by the priest and warrior castes, you must follow what the priest tells you to do, no matter how ridiculous, or you will burn in hell. In the new system, which is dominated by the merchant caste, you just have to replace the priest by wealth. Our value today is equated to the stuff we own, and we still are as obsessed as before, if not more, with appearances and status. We are still the slaves of society. It's just a society that changed its name. Now it's a society of materialism. And we always want more and more, and we're never satisfied, to the point of depression a lot of times. So we keep buying and buying and buying to distract ourselves from the dullness of our lives and to make the capitalists richer. You know, that's just the way it is. So I would like to quote Carl Jung here, because he is for me the greatest psychologist and psychiatrist in history. He invented major concepts like the archetype, the collective unconscious, and the complex, which have explained a lot about human nature, and his opinion and his experience, he's been dealing with a lot of patients, is extremely relevant. And here's what he said: naturally, every age thinks that all ages before it were prejudiced, and today we think this more than ever and are just as wrong. How often have we not seen the truth condemned? It is sad, but unfortunately true, that man learns nothing from history. And this is so true. Today's materialistic idols are illusions just as much as any other idol in the past. Physicists have proven that the atoms constituting all matter are 99.99999999999% empty. And even the actual particles, the 0.0000000000001% that is not empty, are not even real. At the microscopic level, they behave like waves or energy, not like matter, right? One of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, Nobel Prize winner Max Planck, said the following: as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you this much: there is no matter as such. But that's not all. Imagine you throw particles against an obstacle with 2 slits and a screen at the end. If you make your observation at the end, you will notice that the particles behaved like waves, leaving that very, very strange pattern on the left. I mean, how could a particle that went straight through a slit here in the middle end up all the way at the extremity of the screen? Makes no sense. It's crazy. The only way to explain it is that it behaves like a wave. But what's even crazier is that if you make your observation during the experiment, the particles suddenly start to behave like particles and follow the more reassuring pattern that we see on the right. So wait a second, that means your observation, just your observation, changed the outcome of the experiment. Your observation manufactured a different physical reality. This is absolutely mind-blowing. But the most extraordinary is that if you make your observation when the particle is between the obstacle and the screen, in the middle here, the particles behave like waves until the point of your observation, whereby the wave function of the particle is equally spread between left and right, so we don't know where it can be. But as soon as we look, the wave collapses, as they say, into either one of the 2 options, as if the particle had gone through that specific slit from the beginning, in the past, before you even made your observation. That's absolutely unbelievable. In other words, it means that not only does your observation shape the physical reality of the present, it also shapes the past. It determined if it went through the right or the left slit before you even made your observation. Crazy. So our consciousness is shaping our reality from past to future. And actually, in most esoteric traditions of spirituality, God is both outside but also inside of us. And that's actually represented in the yin-yang symbol of Taoism, for example, where you have yin, that's the inside of God, represents the inside, and yang represents the outside. But it's also in the Quran, where God is actually described as al-zahir wal-batin, that is apparent but also inside. So now, since we have the ability to influence reality, if we unconsciously decide to be worthless, we certainly will be. There's a quote from Henry Ford that I really like. He said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right." And because society is ingraining us with limiting beliefs since birth, we systematically constrain ourselves to please idols that are not real. We make these social beliefs ours, even though they go against our interests, against our happiness, and against our potential as divine entities. But we refuse to see this in spite of all the signs proving us otherwise. And this actually leads me to assumption number 4. Coincidences are meaningless accidents. So here I'd like to go back to Carl Jung's psychology and the concept of synchronicity that he invented. A synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. So after reading a lot about psychology, it appeared to me that human beings operate on 3 levels: conscious, unconscious, and universal. On the universal level, there is no difference between me, you, the rest of humanity, God, whatever you want to name it, and the universe. We are all one. And synchronicities happen exactly at that level. I'll give you an example. One day, there was a church that exploded in Nebraska in the US. At the time when a 15-people choir always meet. But when it exploded on that specific moment, no one was hurt because everyone was late, right? Now, past performance indicated that each person would come late about 1 time out of 4. So if you take 4 to the power of 15, which is the number of people in the choir, you get 1.1 billion, right? 4 to the power of 15 is 1.1 billion. That means that there is 1 chance in over a billion that no one would show up at a given rehearsal on a specific time, right? And that happened to be at the exact date and time when the church exploded, right? So 1 chance in over a billion that it happened in general, and that happens exactly when the church explodes. So that is called a synchronicity, and that's actually verified. If you go on Snopes.com, you can read all the details of who, why. Everybody had a good reason, like this guy was late because of this and this. Everything is explained on Snopes, so you can look it up. So this is an illustration of the Symphonie des Misérables de Victor Hugo, and I explain why I put it here in a moment. But just for the people who aren't familiar with the story, in the book, the hero Jean Valjean actually stole the silver of a bishop who was very generous to have welcomed him at the time when Jean Valjean was being spat upon by everyone because he just came out of jail. And obviously that's something that's very wrongly looked upon by society. So he's hopeless. This guy is very generous, to host him. He steals the silver, runs away, the police catches him and brings him back to the bishop. Now if I were the bishop, I would be pretty pissed, right? That, someone would abuse my generosity like that. But instead of getting his silver back and sending Jean Valjean back to jail, the bishop pretended that he actually had given the silver to Jean Valjean. And he even gave him some more silver in front of the policeman, which is what you can see on the picture. So, for me, it had a very huge impact. I know it's only literature, but it was so inspiring to me to see that this is something that, you can even conceptualize. And it really illustrates how a simple gesture of selflessness can do amazing things. Because thanks to that, Jean Valjean in the story goes from criminal to becoming this amazing, selfless businessman and mayor of a city who would do anything to help others. So that shows that when you give selfless love to a marginalized individual, such as a criminal, an orphan, or a prostitute, who are the heroes of the book, Les Misérables, there are chances you will give birth to a hero. Because their relationship with society is so conflicting, they are less scared to look outside of the box and accomplish wonders, literally. And if you think about it, two of the great prophets of monotheistic religions, Moses and Muhammad, were orphans who had the chance to be supported early on. So really the point of this presentation is not to advocate a change in the global education system, because I think it is perfectly appropriate for the majority of people that don't have the incentive to question the system. But what I'm saying is that for people who are forced into questioning the system because they are so oppressed by it, then an alternative outlook could be extremely rewarding, And that's the point of the presentation. And the reason why I want to link this to Synchronicities is because, I only started thinking about making that presentation very recently, just a few months ago. And around that time, it was in the spring, I was in Mauritania. So before going to Mauritania, I had actually spoken with Catherine. I told her I was going to have a look at the way orphanages work over there. So the first strange thing that happens to me is that I wanted to get in touch with the director of a local bank. And I obviously got the wrong number because the lady who picked up the phone greeted me with bonjour, with a slightly obvious American accent. And there are only French and Arabic speakers in Mauritania, so that was very strange. So I asked her what she was doing here as an American. And she told me that she felt her life in the US was not fulfilling and she wanted to do something meaningful. So she went to volunteer in a very poor clinic in the ghetto of Nouakchott, the capital of Mauritania, which very strangely reminded me of what Catherine had done. So that was the first interesting coincidence. What were the odds that I would dial the wrong number and reach that specific person and be the only American in the entire country, right? So I told her we definitely have to meet, and we did. And it was great. It was fascinating to her experience. One of the things she told me reminded me actually of what a very dear friend of mine had told me after her trip to Ethiopia. She told me, in the US we have everything we want, and yet we are profoundly unhappy. In the clinic here, I see children in disastrous health conditions, bleeding all over, and yet they seem so happy and they are always smiling at us. And that's actually one of the main points that I was making in the presentation. So that was the first thing that really kind of caught my attention. So the second thing is I had to go to visit one very, very big fish factory, probably the largest in West Africa. And I speak with the owner and he tells me he employs mostly ex-prostitutes. And I was like, wow, in Mauritania, really? And he told me why. He said, not only because, just out of good heart, he wanted to hire them to give them a second chance, but also, like the more business-minded, aspect, he told me that they actually end up being much more dedicated and productive than the average worker. That's exactly the point that I wanted to make in the presentation also, and that's what I was alluding to with the story of Les Misérables. So that was also one a bit of a shock for me. But that's not it. He also told me the following. He said, look, a lot of people believe that racism is between black and white mostly, right? But in reality, Africans are even more racist within their own tribe. And he gave me an example. He said, look at this guy, let's call him Omar. Let's imagine he's the boss of Ali in the factory. So Omar is the boss, and Ali is like some, worthless, whatever, from the factory's perspective, right? But because Omar is from a slave caste in the same tribe, he is not allowed to sit when Ali is around. And he needs to, bow his head, stay quiet, all these things. So when you see them interact, you would swear that Ali is the boss. But in reality it's the other way around. So this artificial creation of hierarchy between human beings, between a slave and a master, or between an employee and a boss, it's the same thing. That's definitely another synchronicity with the content of the presentation that I was starting to think about at the time. So that was also very interesting. Then the third thing, I get in touch with an association that helps orphans, and guess what? They also go to prisons to help criminals reintegrate society. So in the span of a week, that's how long I stayed in Mauritania, I dealt with the three heroes of my favorite novel, Les Misérables, around which I was actually planning to make this presentation. That was a lot to handle, but the best part is this. One morning, that I was actually thinking of the trip that I should probably make to Montreal for personal reasons, and without which I obviously wouldn't be here today. As I go to the reception of the hotel, which wasn't even in Nouakchott, in the capital, it was in Nouadhibou, it's like even more remote. That's what you can see on the picture. What do I see standing alone in the middle of the reception desk? The flags of Quebec and Canada, in a hotel in Nouadhibou, Mauritania. The very, maybe maybe an hour or so after I was actually thinking about the trip that I should be making there. And I asked everyone, nobody knew where it came from. I really wanted to know who put that flag here. And I asked, and I even got, the vice director of the National Electricity Company to make phone calls and everything, and they finally found the guy. He gave me an email address. Said, oh yeah, it has to be this guy. It's the Canadian, guy who came one day to teach, sailing or something. So I get in touch with him and I said, oh yeah, I would like to meet you when I come to Canada. It's great, synchronicities and stuff. And he said, no, it's not me. Nobody knew where the flags came from, but they were there. As if it was the sole purpose of this flag was for my indication. It was crazy. So essentially, the more I believe in synchronicities, the more they seem to happen. And that's once again because I start to get a grasp that I really do create my own reality. And obviously, this is definitely not the type of things that you will learn at school. And another thing that they won't tell you about at school is the golden ratio. So the golden ratio can be estimated as the ratio of two consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci series that you can see above here on the screen. Each number is equal to the sum of the two previous numbers in the series. And the golden ratio is approximately equal to 1.618. Now we find the Fibonacci series and the golden ratio everywhere in nature, from trees to flowers to body shapes to shells, tornadoes, galaxies, facial features. I mean, the golden ratio and symmetry actually are an indication of beauty and perfection, which is why it is also extensively used in art and architecture. Anyway, it's everywhere, right? But we never hear about this at school. It's strange. Maybe because it strongly implies intelligent design, which is not exactly aligned with the credo of materialism and atheism that school is putting into our heads, right? And actually, the first time that I heard about synchronicities and the golden ratio was in a Friday prayer speech that some sheikh gives in a mosque. If there are Arabic speakers among you, you can look it up on YouTube. It's very interesting. There are two speeches actually from Sheikh Adnan Ibrahim. The first one is called At-Tazamuniyah Bayna As-Sudfati wal-Qadar. That's about synchronicities. And the other one is called An-Nisbatu Dhahabiyya wa Sirru al-Jamal, which is about the golden ratio. It's very interesting. I think if you get a chance, it's worth watching. So the Sheikh in the second presentation on the golden ratio pretended that Mecca's latitude was exactly located on the golden ratio between the North and the South Pole. Okay, so that sounded a bit too good to be true, for his point. And since I don't like to take things for granted, I went on Wikipedia and did the computation myself. I put it here on the screen, and guess what? I found exactly 1.618. I mean, that was crazy. I was in shock when I looked at this result. The thing is that he also had used a very convoluted logic to find the golden ratio in the longitude also. But this didn't make sense to me. I really, tried to figure it out, but it was confusing, and I tried to crunch the numbers and it didn't work. But then I thought about it and I was like, there's a good reason why it doesn't work. Because if you think about it, the longitudes are arbitrarily based on Greenwich, which was determined by the British Empire in the 19th century. So how relevant is that really, huh? And if you think even further, you realize that at the end of the day, there is no east-west pole to serve as a more universal reference, because the Earth, obviously rotates around a north-south axis. So that shouldn't even make sense. But because he sparked my curiosity, and because it worked so perfectly well with the latitude, I kind of decided to take the logic in reverse and determine the point on Earth whose relative position to Mecca would yield the golden ratio. So the calculation is here, and I found 98 west. So then I looked up very quickly the few sites that were located on this longitude, and I found a World Heritage Site in the town of Puebla in Mexico. And guess what? This town was built after some guy had a vision of the Archangel Michael and his little, angel friends, showing him where exactly to build the city. So, the only two archangels who are common to both Islam and Christianity are Gabriel, who made the revelation in Mecca to Prophet Muhammad, and Michael, who apparently appeared in that vision at exactly the golden ratio of Mecca on the globe. Okay, now watch this.